All right, good evening, everybody. In a way, we have a lot of material to get through tonight. I don't think it's going to be that big of a problem. I really had to pare it down. So we're hopefully going to be covering chapters 41 through 45. But the way it's all kind of one big set of interconnected things happening. It's really one story. And from certain chapters, we're only going to be reading key verses. There's a good paragraph or two in our workbook that basically covers all of one chapter and explains certain things very well. So I think we'll be okay. I wish we could spend a little more time, especially digging into Joseph. But kind of like last week, even though there are things to talk about, there are things to discuss, the story is pretty straightforward. There's not a ton of, we need to discuss this big ancient Near Eastern connection and the way it connects to Scripture over here and there. So it's pretty straightforward. I think we'll still find some interesting things. But yeah, that's the goal and the plan for tonight. We're basically going to be talking about Pharaoh's dreams and the children of Israel traveling to Egypt a few different times. All right, so I'll open up in prayer and we can get started. Lord, we thank you for this night. We thank you for the group that was able to make it out. We just pray you'd be with us during this time. Help us to understand your word and understand you better because of it. We thank you for this time. In your name, Jesus, I pray. Amen. All right, so last week we talked about Joseph and his brothers. Joseph gets sold into slavery. We saw him ascend in his master's house and had his downfall because of Potiphar's wife. And Joseph, for the first time sort of in the book of Genesis, is suffering unjustly. Most of the other people that we've come across in Genesis who are suffering, it's usually their fault in some way. Joseph is the one where I think we can say he didn't deserve especially that. No, he did not deserve prison for that. No, he didn't deserve prison. And then in prison, he also kind of rises as high as you can in this prison situation, and he interprets the dreams of Pharaoh's baker and butler or cupbearer. So the baker was executed, as Joseph predicted, and the butler was released and returned to his position. And Joseph requested that this man remember him and mention him to Pharaoh. And we ended last week with 2 years going by. The butler failed to mention anything. So that's where we're going to pick up. We're actually basically going to work our way through chapter 41 in one go. I'm not reading the whole thing, so I'll let you know what we're reading. We'll fill in some gaps along the way. But let's start with chapter 41, verses 1 through 8. And it came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh dreamed, and behold, he stood by the river, and behold, there came up out of the river 7 well-favored kine and fat-fleshed, and they fed in the meadow. And behold, 7 other kine came up after them out of the river, ill-favored and lean-fleshed, and stood by the other kine upon the brink of the river. And the ill-favored and lean-fleshed kine did eat up the 7 well-favored and fat kine. So Pharaoh awoke, and he slept and dreamed a second time. And behold, 7 ears of corn came up upon one stalk, rank and good. And behold, 7 thin ears, and blasted with the east wind, sprung up after them. And the 7 thin ears devoured the 7 rank and full ears. And Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. It came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled, and he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt, and all the wise men thereof. And Pharaoh told him his dream, but there was none that could interpret them unto Pharaoh. Let's do verse 9. Then spake the chief butler unto Pharaoh, saying, I do remember my faults this day. Pharaoh was wroth with his servant, put me in the ward, we don't have to read that. Okay, so there's a lot of review in these chapters, so even though I wish we could read more, there's a lot of, you've already heard this, and you're going to hear this other person explain it to someone who doesn't know. So the butler takes time to explain everything we knew about Joseph in prison with the dreams. Verse 14. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him hastily out of the dungeon. And he shaved himself and changed his raiment, and came in unto Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I have dreamed a dream, and there is none that can interpret it. And I have heard say of thee that thou canst understand a dream to interpret it. Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, It is not in me. God shall give Pharaoh an answer of peace. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, In my dream, and once again we get a recap of what we just read of Pharaoh's dreams. Verse 25. Joseph said unto Pharaoh, The dream of Pharaoh is one. God has showed Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good kine are 7 years, and 7 good ears are 7 years, and the dream is one. The 7 thin and ill-favored kine that came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 empty ears blasted with the east wind shall be 7 years of famine. This is the thing which I have spoken unto Pharaoh. What God is about to do, he showeth unto Pharaoh. Behold, there come 7 years of great plenty throughout the land of Egypt, and there shall arise after them 7 years of famine, and all the plenty shall be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine shall consume the land. And the plenty shall not be known in the land by reason of the famine following, for it shall be very grievous. And for that the dream was doubled unto Pharaoh twice. It is because the thing is established by God, and God will surely bring it to pass. Now therefore let Pharaoh look out a man discreet and wise, and set him over the land of Egypt. Joseph tells him, he interprets the dream, as we read, and then he says, okay, you gotta find some very intelligent man who can do something about this situation. So Joseph suggests basically a tax during the 7 years of plenty. Says have everyone bring 20% of their grain, mostly corn, to Pharaoh. Someone will collect it, store up the grain for 7 years, and then when the famine hits, at least the government has grain that they can sell to the people. Now you'd think, at least I would think, hey, these people are being taxed on this during the good years. Maybe this way we can distribute grain. But for whatever reason, Joseph says, hey, collect the grain, then we can sell the grain. And so you get that done. 7 good years will allow us to get through 7 years of famine. Verse 37. And the thing was good in the eyes of Pharaoh, and in the eyes of all his servants. And Pharaoh said unto his servants, Can we find such a one as this, a man in whom the Spirit of God is? Pharaoh said unto Joseph, For as much as God has shown thee all this, there is none so discreet and wise as thou art. Thou shalt be over my house, and according unto thy word shall all my people be ruled. Only in the throne will I be greater than thou. Pharaoh said unto Joseph, See, I have set thee over all the land of Egypt. Pharaoh took off his ring from his hand, and put it upon Joseph's hand, and arrayed him in vestures of fine linen, and put a gold chain around his neck. And he made him to ride in the second chariot which he had, and they cried before him, bow the knee, and he made him a ruler over all the land of Egypt. Verse 46, and Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went throughout all the land of Egypt. And then we'll finish this chapter with verses 50 to 52. Unto Joseph were born two sons, Unto Joseph were born two sons before the years of famine came, which Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, priest of On, bare unto him. Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh, for God, said he, hath made me forget all my toil and all my father's house. And the name of the second one called he Ephraim, for God hath caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. All right, we read a lot. I interjected a lot. I know that's kind of scattered and all over the place. We're probably familiar with this story, maybe. Maybe there's some details that you haven't thought about in a while. What stands out? What do you think? What's interesting to you there? Yeah, so that's more... I think Pharaoh's reaction is a bit more standard. So when he has a dream, he has a host of magicians and wise men that he can call on. So even if something of this magnitude doesn't happen all the time, that's still very much part of their, like, the way the gods speak, especially to kings. So it's interesting that his wise men were at least honest with him. You know, no one just started making stuff up. I think the thing that is unique about Nebuchadnezzar and Daniel is that a king asking his wise men, hey, tell me the dream that I had, is so ridiculous and off the wall. I think Pharaoh's way of doing it is far more normal. Possibly. I mean, he quickly becomes very high status. And they didn't come that quickly. So it's right before the famine starts. So there's at least 7 years. Was it 2 years before the famine? Is that what it said? Okay. Yeah, 2 years before the famine. Yep. Yeah, that's an important theme that develops in the life, especially of Joseph. I mean, it's kind of always been at play in Genesis, the exaltation of, like, the lower, however that takes form. And then Joseph seems to be just like a ultimate, in the book of Genesis, example of that. Well, even, what is it, Proverbs 6, the ant and the slug? Yeah. The ant and the slug. I think Proverbs 6 or 9 or somewhere around there. Yeah, it had to be big. I mean, so... No, like dried grain, you know. I mean, it would expire eventually, but grain stores for a long time, which is why it's so useful to, I mean, even today, but especially back then. I don't think we read the verse, but verse 49, and Joseph gathered corn as much as the sand of the sea, very much until he left numbering, for he was without number. He stored a lot of grain. I'm going to say definitively that's probably what the pyramids were for. You just pour it in the top and it fills up. And yeah. Don't fact check that. Yeah, and especially a time when, if there's ever a time to make yourself look good, it's when you're trying to get out of prison and you have an opportunity to impress the king. But yeah, no, he gives glory directly to God for that. Yeah, so a lot of grain. There are a lot of questions we can ask. Beyond some little things, the chapter's pretty straightforward, even though it's miraculous. It's dealing in kind of, can we say, esoteric things that, your dreams and dream interpretation, and you have some magicians around, and, you have out of the ordinary spiritual things going on. But it's all pretty simple to understand. We do see how Joseph matures, and how he's been maturing over the years of being humbled and being blessed throughout it. So notice this is his third exaltation, if you will. He was exalted in Potiphar's house, in the prison, and then over Egypt. So he kind of has a cycle of threes going on, just as far as the literature goes. And it is interesting. He marries an Egyptian woman, and he didn't end up with the same pep talk from his father of, hey, you got to go back to the land of Nahor and all our people. He didn't have that opportunity. I'm sure this woman was very high status as well. So she is a priest, or she is the daughter of a priest. Verse 50 tells us the priest of On. That is an alternate name for the city of Hierapolis. So that would be, I'm drawing a blank. Ra, the sun god, Heliopolis. That's what I didn't write it down. I was reading it and I'm like, oh yeah, no, I know all that stuff. Whenever you think I don't need to write it down, I'll remember that. That's the devil at work. So her father would have been a priest for Heliopolis, a city dedicated to Ra, the sun god. Whether she would have been involved in that, I don't know. I mean, she's an Egyptian. You have to imagine she would have been an Egyptian. We don't get an indication that she's like a priestess. I didn't look enough into the cult of the sun god to know how all that functions. So he takes an Egyptian wife, and it is interesting that just from a genetic perspective, like two of the founding tribes of Israel, who will be, Manasseh and Ephraim, they're only half Semitic. They're Egyptian, which is just interesting, especially for all the purity that gets placed later, some of it legitimately, some of it not legitimately. Yeah. Well, and Genesis is interesting because there's no Israelite nation yet. And you do see, like, you can easily call it that. I mean, Abraham is called from the Chaldees. And then you have all these different people showing up who are, like, far more righteous than the patriarchs. You have this Melchizedek. You have, like, all these weird things going on. And then, as much as Israel is going to be concerned later about blood purity, like within their own people, they're a mixture of Chaldean and Egyptian, apparently, Genesis actually gives a much better indication of what I think the future reality is going to be. And by future reality, I mean like under Christ, because it's not as focused on just the Jewish people being the people of God. It's far more broad and inclusive. It's whoever like truly serves God, that's an interesting point. All right, can we talk about the brothers now? Can move on to the brothers. Okay. Okay, we'll set up a few things. We don't have to set up that much. We're going to be jumping around, kind of like we did last chapter. We're going to be in the book a little bit for some of the stuff with the brothers. really the only thing we need to know is that the famine has begun. So Joseph is collecting grain like sand on the seashore during the years of plenty. And the famine begins, and it's not just Egypt that the whole ancient Near East seems to be affected by to some extent, at least Egypt and Canaan. So we'll just do Genesis 42. We'll do verses 1 through 9. I'll ask you some questions. Now when Jacob saw that there was corn in Egypt, Jacob said unto his sons, "Why do you look one upon another?" And he said, "Behold, I have heard that there is corn in Egypt. Get you down thither and buy for us from thence, that we may live and not die." And Joseph's 10 brothers went down to buy corn in Egypt, but Benjamin, Joseph's brother, Jacob, sent not with his brethren, for he said, "Lest peradventure mischief befall him." And the sons of Israel came to buy corn among them, among those that came, for the famine was in the land of Canaan. Joseph was the governor over all the land, and he it was that sold to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brethren came and bowed down themselves before him with their faces to the earth. And Joseph saw his brethren, and he knew them, but he made himself strange unto them, and spoke roughly unto them. And he said unto them, "Whence come ye?" And they said, "From the land of Canaan to buy food." And Joseph knew his brethren, but they knew him not. And Joseph remembered the dreams which he had dreamed of them, and said unto them, "Ye are spies, to see the nakedness of the land ye are come." All right, we can stop there. What is Joseph doing?
Messing with them.
Just pulling a fun little prank? Any other thoughts besides just tomfoolery? Yeah, that was my next question. Why don't they recognize him? I mean, it's been a while, but he recognizes them. Yeah, you ever like run into a coworker outside of work and you're like, you have to do a double take. Is that person? They're not wearing their uniform. It doesn't even look like them. You'd walk right by them. So they don't expect them to be there. But I think some of the other stuff you mentioned is probably an even bigger deal. So one of the details that we didn't really focus on, when they brought Joseph out of prison, they had him shaved. So Egypt was big on, they did not do hair. So a lot of the hieroglyphs you see, some of them did the beard chin, but sometimes that was just gold, or some sort of precious metal. Sometimes that was fake. They usually have a shaved head. The pharaohs will have some sort of important looking hat on. For a host of reasons, however their culture develops into making this the norm, probably honestly up until pretty recently historically, lice and bugs and things like that are a big deal. As much as we like to in our fantasy in the ancient world, everyone had long hair because that's what I saw in a King Arthur movie. It's not that common because your hair would be filled with bugs, and it was just very common. So for whatever reason, they would tend to completely shave, at the very least, their head and their face. And the higher officials, something that you've also probably seen in movies that may or may not be more accurate depending on the movie, is they did do different sort of paints, especially for higher officials. You can imagine the heavy kind of eyeshadow type, black eyeshadow type thing, maybe even all sorts of different things like that. He would have been dressed in full Egyptian garb, as fine as it gets besides Pharaoh. So yeah, without any hair with possibly makeup on and Egyptian clothing. It's been a long time now, you know. Yeah, so it's a bit of everything. And we'll see more of his interactions around Benjamin later. But he does, you know, whether he's doing it the way he was with Joseph or if he learned a little bit of a lesson, but maybe not, because he doesn't know that his favoritism was part of what aggravated them enough to sell Joseph into slavery, you know. He definitely does have a softer spot for Benjamin because he's in his mind, the last child of Rachel. It's the child that he had in his old age. You know, he's a very unique person in his life. So yeah, I think there's a little bit of favoritism going on. We don't know if he has a fancy coat, but he definitely has some specific protective streak for Benjamin. Joseph accuses them of being spies, even though he knows they're clearly not. And we saw his dream come to pass. And Joseph saw Joseph's dream come to pass. It's interesting that the text points that out. Like, he saw this happen and he remembered this dream from like 20 years ago. So what he ends up doing is he puts them in jail. He says, what I'm going to do, he asks them a series of questions, which, because you know he's Joseph, you see what he's probing for. He claims that, like, okay, you guys said you have your father living back home, you have a younger brother back home. He says, okay, to prove you're not spies, I'm going to put all of you in jail. One of you can go back and bring that younger brother to me to prove that you are who you say you are and you're not spies. After 3 days, he puts them in jail for 3 days. And then after that time, he says, okay, look, I'm not going to keep all of you. I will send everyone except for one of you. You all go back, bring your son if you want more food, or bring your younger brother if you want more food. So Simeon stays in jail for some reason. I looked it up. I tried, like, is there a reason he stayed as opposed to anyone else? No commentators have any really good opinion on this. I don't know if he volunteered. I don't know if... We don't know. Like, he's not heavily involved in the story, of Joseph and everything that happened there. But Simeon stays. So he does let them go back with corn or grain. And when they stop for the night, they realize that all their money has been returned to their bags. And they are very concerned. All right, look in your book on page 123. Okay, page 123, the bold, Joseph keeps Simeon. It says, no longer insisting that one man fetch Benjamin while the others remained in Egypt, Joseph bound Simeon and kept him in prison. Joseph ordered that every man's purchase money be placed in his sack of grain because he wanted to increase the brothers' consternation, making his test of them more severe. He would find out what kind of men they had become. In response, they asked, what is this that God has done unto us? Their consciences were awakened, and they were conscious of God. Upon arriving home, the brothers told their father the entire story. And that takes up quite a bit of text. No, not at all. No, they don't come clean for a while. Well, until they're forced to. Yeah. So when they were being interrogated by Joseph, and he said, like, you know, is your father alive? Do you have any other brothers? They said, like, as they're talking about their other brother, they basically say, when Joseph says, hey, you have to bring that brother, he says, like, no, he's the son of my father's old age, the son of his favorite wife. He had a brother, but he's no longer alive, as they're talking to Joseph. And you're like, I mean, I guess they're just talking to an official. Like they're sticking to their story many years later. However, and you know what, I would encourage you to, if you have spare time, to read these chapters in more detail. Because as all this is unfolding, as they find their money back in their bag, and they had to leave for because of a famine. Now one of their brothers is locked up in Egypt. They're going to get their other younger brother, and they don't know what's going to happen there. When they find their money back in the bag, they kind of all have this collective, like, we're being punished. Like, our brother's blood is on our hands, and God is doing this. You know, they're fully convinced. So they do have moments of, like, you know, it's kind of like one of those, like a horror movie where, you know, the teenagers did that thing back in high school, and 20 years later they still, you know, it's still like haunting them. So yeah, we do get to see to an extent the change and the growth of even these 10 brothers, aside from Joseph and Benjamin. So it is worth looking into more. Look at chapter 42, verse 36. We'll just do 36 to 38. So they go home, they tell Jacob what happened. They knew he wasn't going to agree to send Benjamin. Verse 36, and Jacob their father said unto them, Me have ye bereaved of my children. Joseph is not, and Simeon is not, and ye will take Benjamin away? All these things are against me. Reuben spoke unto his father, saying, Slay my 2 sons, if I bring him not to thee, or if he doesn't bring Benjamin home. Deliver him into my hand, and I will bring him to thee again. And he said, My son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead, and he is left alone. If mischief befall him by the way in which ye go, then shall ye bring down my gray hairs with sorrow to the grave. So besides the very extreme proposal from Reuben, it's interesting that, so Reuben was a key character in what happened with Joseph. Now, he was the one who said, hey, let's not kill him. We'll just throw him in a pit and let him die. But secretly, he wanted to come back later. So Reuben is taking responsibility for Benjamin and his safety at this point. Okay, so second trip to Egypt. So they run out of corn. So they leave Simeon for like longer than you would expect. There's no time stamp, but they're running out of the grain that Joseph sent them with.
It seems like they wanted to go back right away, but
Jacob wouldn't allow it. Yeah, so Jacob tells them, like, okay, we're running low, you guys have to go back to Egypt. And they tell him, look, this guy was serious. He thinks we're spies. They still have our brother. He said if we don't bring Benjamin and prove who we are, he's not going to let us trade in Egypt. Look with me at chapter 43, verse 8 and 9. So as they are trying to convince Jacob to let Benjamin go, 43 verse 8, Judah said unto Israel his father, Send the lad with me, and we will arise and go, that we may live and not die, both we and thou, and also our little ones. I will be surety for him. Of my hand shalt thou require him. If I bring him not unto thee, and set him before thee, then let me bear the blame forever. Okay, so he keeps talking, but you have another person heavily involved in what happened to Joseph back in the day, now saying, like, you hold me personally responsible for whatever happens to Benjamin. Let him come with me. I'll watch over him. If anything happens, you blame me and me alone till the day you die. So Judah is, of course, the one who said, we don't really get anything if we just let Joseph die. Let's sell him into slavery. So that's this one. And from this end of things, you're watching, okay, now how he feels about, you've already seen some of their regret along the way, their conviction that God is dealing harshly with them for what they did to Joseph. And now he has a very different attitude towards Benjamin. So you're seeing a transformation in Reuben, in Judah, and really just the brothers as a whole. So Jacob allows them to go, to take Benjamin. Because of the fact that they came back with grain and the money last time, Jacob says, okay, you bring the money that you were supposed to give them and offer them double for whatever you're going to buy for them this time. And they brought assorted figs and fruits and just all sorts of gifts to try to smooth this situation over. All right. In your textbook, look at page 125. We're going to read a good chunk of this because this really covers basically chapter 42, or no, 44. It's invitation to Joseph's home. So they go down to Egypt, and they are invited into Joseph's home, which they are very concerned about because you shouldn't be in. They're thinking he thinks we're spies. He thinks we stole from him because we still had our money. All right. Invitation to Joseph's home. Continuing to test his brothers, Joseph brought them to his home. That frightened them. Was the man in Egypt about to accuse them of theft, confiscate their animals, and make slaves of them? Eagerly they defended themselves to the overseer of Joseph's house, but there was no cause for alarm. Simeon was restored to them, and they were to dine with Joseph. Joseph asked, "Is your father well, the old man of whom you spake? Is he yet alive?" Seeing Benjamin, he asked, "Is this your younger brother, of whom you spake unto me? God be gracious unto thee, my son." Then, choked with emotion, he hurried from the room where he could weep. At dinner, Joseph tested his brothers further. They were astonished to find themselves seated according to their ages. In addition, Benjamin was served 5 times as much food as his brothers. Joseph knew what he was doing. He knew how jealous the men had been when his father favored him. Would they feel the same towards Benjamin in these circumstances? Joseph tested his brothers further to discover whether they would sacrifice Benjamin to save their own skins and thereby deeply wound their father again. The brothers departed, not knowing that Joseph's silver cup had been hidden in Benjamin's sack. Overtaken by Joseph's steward, a short distance away, they tore their clothes in astonishment and grief when the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. They refused to accept the steward's offer to go free while Benjamin was detained. They all went back to the city. They were not about to desert Benjamin. Okay, even though we read that, I want to read some of that text because I think there are some interesting things in there. But all that made sense. It is a funny detail that he had them seated according to age. They'd be very... One, I wonder how long it took them to figure that out. It's probably not what you're thinking of. And it is also worth noting, if you read the whole thing, you see Joseph used an interpreter the whole time, which was very clever. He looks like an Egyptian, he's speaking like an Egyptian. He understands every word that they are saying, and he still speaks through some sort of Semitic interpreter. Very clever. Look with me in chapter 45. So, yeah, this will explain some stuff. Oh, no. Maybe 44? Yeah, okay. 44. And he commanded the steward of his house, saying, "Fill the men's sack with food, as much as they can carry, and put every man's money in his sack's mouth. And put my cup, the silver cup, in the sack's mouth of the youngest, and his corn money." And he did according to the word Joseph had spoken. As soon as the morning was light, the men were sent away, they and their asses. And when they were gone out of the city, and not yet far off, Joseph said unto the steward, "Up, follow after the men, and when thou dost overtake them, say unto them, Wherefore have ye rewarded evil for good? Is not this it in which my Lord drinketh, and whereby indeed he divineth? Ye have done evil in so doing." And he overtook them, and spoke unto them these same words. And they said unto him, "Wherefore saith my Lord these words? God forbid that thy servant should do according to this thing. Behold, the money which we found in our sacks' mouths we brought again unto thee out of the land of Canaan. How then should we steal out of thy Lord's house silver or gold? With whomsoever of thy servants it be found, both let him die, and we also will be my Lord's bondmen." High stakes, very high stakes. It almost reminds you of when Laban's statues were missing, and Jacob says, "If you find them in anyone's tent, kill them. The fine, like we don't have this." These men are very confident. Kill whichever man has the cup, and if you find it, we will all be your servants. This is why I just read the whole thing when you have time. So when they're called into Joseph's house, and they're trying to explain to the overseer of the house, like, "Look, we think there was some sort of mistake. We paid this money. The same amount was back in our bags with the grain." And he says, "No, don't worry about it. Your God must have blessed you. We have your money." So they totally just made up, "No, we got paid. You're fine. It's not us. Don't worry about it." What they thought of that, I don't know. At the very least, whatever bizarre, and they're eating dinner with Joseph, even though they still don't recognize him, which is interesting. But for whatever reason, they seem to know that they are favored by him in some bizarre way. So even the fact that, even if some of them had seen, I don't know why, but they did this again. I don't know why he's blessing us this way. I don't know why he's eating dinner with us. It's all very odd behavior. But then, they really set themselves up. We got to finish up soon, but I was getting very close, so close, sort of close. Okay. Verse 11. Then they speedily took down every man his sack to the ground, and opened every one his sack. And he searched, and begun at the eldest, and left at the youngest. And the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. They rent their clothes, and laded every man his ass, and returned to the city. And Judah and his brethren came to Joseph's house, for he was yet there. And they fell before him on the ground. And Joseph said unto them, "What deed is this that ye have done?" Know ye not that such a man as I can certainly divine? And Judah said, "What shall we say unto my Lord? What shall we speak? Or how shall we clear ourselves? God has found out the iniquity of thy servants. Behold, we are thy Lord's servants, both we and he also with whom the cup is found." And he said, "God forbid that I should do so. But the man in whose hand the cup is found, he shall be my servant. As for you, get you up in peace unto your father." Okay, verse 25. Judah starts speaking up. Okay, so we understand what happened. Joseph said, "No, that's ridiculous. I'm not going to have you all be slaves. You guys go home. You're free to go. I'm going to keep Benjamin." So the book had good insight on that when we read the last big section, because he's giving them an opportunity to do the same thing they did to him. Are they going to abandon Benjamin, break their father's heart again, to save themselves. So he fully gives them this opportunity. And then Judah goes on a very long, impassioned speech. Look at verse 25. This is Judah speaking. And our father said, "Go again and buy us a little food." We said, "We cannot go down. If our youngest brother be with us, then we will go down. For we may not see the man's face, except our younger brother be with us." And thy servant, my father, said unto us, "Ye know that my wife bare me 2 sons, and the one went out from me. And I said, Surely he is torn in pieces, and I saw him not since." Yeah, I did something with my notes. Okay. So he explains to Joseph everything that him and his father had talked about. Verse 33, still Judah. "Now therefore, I pray thee, let thy servant, let me, Judah, abide instead of the lad as a bondman to my Lord. Let the lad go up with his brethren. For how shall I go up unto my father, and the lad be not with me, lest peradventure I see the evil that shall come upon my father." So we don't have time to dig into a ton of this. I guess we'll have to pick up here next week and finish off. I don't know how much of like the Genesis overview we'll get. Sorry. It's a big book. But we see Joseph's plan bearing fruit, and it is specifically Judah who made the promise to his father, but the one who Joseph knows sold him into slavery all those years ago now is offering to be a slave himself in place of his brother. So as Joseph's been testing them the whole time, kind of seeing what's become of them, what type of men they've become, all along the way, he's given them opportunity to be dishonest. He's given them the opportunity to, kind of leave Simeon. He's given them the opportunity to save their own skins and just, leave Benjamin, do the similar thing they did with him. And, Joseph doesn't know anything about Reuben, making a similar kind of proclamation to their father back in Canaan. But he sees Judah, who is like one of the key aggressors, have a completely different change of heart, outlook, and is now willing to sacrifice himself for his brother. And this is Judah's redemptive moment. This is a great theme of the Bible, of course. These greatest moments that different patriarchs and prophets and Jesus have is offering to give themselves in the place of someone else. That is, what Jesus describes as no greater love than this. This is being played out in Judah, and Joseph's plan worked very well, and we'll see the conclusion of that next week. And hopefully more. Hopefully we won't just see the conclusion of that next week. It shouldn't take too long, but, Anything else before we close? I know we covered so much. I fully understand that. I would have liked to take many more weeks with Joseph, but time does not permit. Anything before we close? And I think it's worth noting that, we'll see some of this play out as they do, as the story ends, and we know they find out it's Joseph. But even before that, you can see that what they did to Joseph has been having an effect on them throughout the years. Because we always think kind of like you're saying about, these people are unreachable because they have this sin, this secret, this thing going on. And it's and sometimes people will just live in their sin until the day they die. But sin is really destructive and can be used by God in a good way to break down everything that is standing in the way. So it's like they've had to look their father in his face year after year, watch his grief, his sorrow, as they continue to keep this collective secret. I'm sure they have no money left. They sold him for scraps, and as they grow up, as you're right, they have children themselves. They watch Benjamin grow up as the last son of Rachel, and it is not lost on them that their sin has borne a heavy conscience, and that can be really good. Like when there is sin, the conscience should be heavy. So, yeah, there's a lot of room for growth, even with the chaos going on, and God's clearly working on them and using Joseph to work on them, and this situation will turn out for good, but we'll save that for next week. But let's close up. We haven't gone this far past in a while, so good for us. False. All right, let's pray. Lord, we thank you for this night. We thank you for your word. Lord, I just pray, even though we weren't able to go through verse by verse, I pray we would meditate on what we do know, what we did see, some of the key truths that we were able to hone in on. So, Lord, I just thank you for that. Thank you for your word. Pray you'd be with us and bring us back safely next week. In your name, Jesus, I pray. Amen.